We are on the final stretch of this course now. We learned about more core Django features, and now we're going to apply all of them on our project, on our course project. We're going to continue building our blog, and in this course section, we are going to add a comments section with forms so that users, non-logged in users, can leave comments. So outside of the admin section, which we already added before, now we're going to add user-facing forms. And that's, of course, something we did learn over the last course sections. We are also going to add a read later feature where we can mark posts as read later, and we then have a new page on our website where we can view all those marked posts. And we are going to implement this with sessions so that every user has his or her own list of read later posts. And we're also going to add file uploads, because until now, when we add a new post, we always just type in the image name, and we then rely on that image being pre-stored in our source code in the end, and that's not realistic. It would be more realistic that we can upload an image from inside here when we create a post, and that it then is stored, and that it is then stored automatically by Django. And these are, of course, all things we did learn about over the last course sections, so therefore now we're going to implement them step by step. As before, definitely feel free to pause for a second and try this on your own first. Take this as a practice and try implementing those features on your own first, before you then come back and we implement it all together. Now, it's of course up to you with which part you want to start, with the comments or with the file uploads. I will start with the file uploads because that will require changes to our post model, and we'll then have to update or recreate all our posts because of that, because the way we add images will totally change. Therefore, I'll start with the file uploads and then add the other features later. But of course, any order is okay and works. So how do we add file uploads? Well, I definitely don't want to manage storing a file and so on my own. Instead, I want to let Django manage that, just as I taught it to you in the file uploads section. And therefore, I want to go to my models and there to the post model and change this image field here. Instead of storing the image name as a text, I want to store the image as a file, though you learned, of course, that in reality, Django will not store the image in the database, but it will instead store the image on the hard drive, somewhere in our file system, and it will just store the path to that image in the database, and it will then also later give us a URL we can use, and so on. Hence, I'll remove image name from the post model, and instead I'll add an image field. Of course, this name is up to you, where the type should be image field. Not file field, but image field, because I really want to just allow images here. Now that's this field, and I'll set the upload to parameter here to tell Django where this image should be uploaded to. And I want to store it in a posts folder, but important, that posts folder should then itself sit inside of a, let's say, uploads folder. And that uploads folder is a folder which I'll create here on my root level. So I'll add a new uploads folder in my project, which sits next to the global static and templates folders. And this uploads folder, that is the folder where the images should be stored in. To be precise, there they should be stored in a posts subfolder. Now you learned that for this, we need to configure our project a little bit. So let's go to settings py, and there at the very bottom, I will now add this media root setting, which I explained in the file uploads section. Here we control which root folder will be used for storing our media files. And here I want to use that uploads folder. We have to set this to an absolute path, and we can do this with the base_dir variable combined with uploads. I also will set the media URL variable, which then will define the actual URL or the path segment in the URL from which the files will then be served to the client. And that is /uploads here, but this is up to you. This just controls how the URL will later look like for accessing that data. You could also name this files. And let's maybe go with that instead of uploads to make it really clear that these two don't have to be the same. So now this is configured here. And now we need to make sure that we install this pillow package if you didn't do that yet. So for that, I'll quit the dev server, and then with python 3-m pip, I'll install pillow. This extra Python package, which I already did install in the file upload section, which is why I don't need to install it again, or why it instantly finished here. But you need to install this to make sure that the Imagefield works correctly. And thereafter, we can restart our development server. So now the model is adjusted and we added this uploads folder. Now, with our model adjusted, we need to make our migrations again, and we need to run those migrations again. So I'll start by making the migrations with make migrations. And now we have a problem. We have a problem reported to us because we're trying to add a non-nullable field image to posts without a default. So, of course, when we add this new field, we already have existing posts, they don't have an image yet. Now we can either select a one-off default, which will then be assumed for all those existing posts, or we quit and adjust our configuration. Now, as in the past, I will select option 2 here, and I will adjust my image field here slightly. I will add an extra option, and here I'll set null to true to allow null values here. So to make sure that if no image is provided, null is saved in that database field as a special value instead of it being blank. With that, we can make the migrations, and now they are created successfully. And now we can run migrate. If we do so, our database was updated, and we can then, of course, rerun our development server with run server. If we have a look at our application now, here, we of course now get an error though. The problem is that we now still try to access the image name, but that field doesn't exist anymore. If we inspect a single post, we see that the image name field is gone, and instead now here we got a file picker. So let's actually start with that. Let's update the existing posts by picking a file, and then in the next step, let's update this user-facing front end, and let's make sure that we dare then use the uploaded files. So for this, I'll go to mountain hiking, click choose file, and I prepared those images which I had in my project folder before on my desktop folder here as well, so that I can pick them from there. So I'll choose that file, leave the rest as it is, and click save. Now this was saved, and if we quickly check our uploads folder, indeed in there we have a posts folder, and there we have the mountains JPEG file. So this was uploaded. I can now also delete this images folder in the static folder, which we used before, because I'm not using that anymore. We'll only use the uploads folder now. So uploading works, and therefore I'll update the other posts as well. Like programming is great. Pick the appropriate image there, upload this and save the updated post. Also nature at its best. Here I'll take this image, upload this, save this. And last but not least, almost done. Here I'll take this image, upload this, and save this. And now all these images are updated. We could, of course, also add a new post. But with that, we have our images there, but now uploaded. And that's, of course, the more realistic flow which we want to have. Now let's make sure we also serve those uploaded images. When it comes to serving images, we got a couple of things to do. For example, in our templates of our blog app, there in all the places where we display images, we have to change how we want to display them. For example, in our post include, here currently we're using the static tag to display images which we expect to find in our static folder. That's no longer the case. Instead of using this approach, we now want to interpolate a value here instead of using the static tag, and we simply want to access post.image.url. Post.image because I picked image as a field name here, and then you learned in the file uploads section that images stored with help of a model, or files in general stored with help of a model, do have a couple of nested properties. For example, this URL property, which gives us the URL to that image. Now we also no longer need to load static here in post HTML because we're not using the static tag here anymore. Now on the post detail HTML file, it's similar. There I also previously included my static image. Now I'll replace this here with an interpolation where I also access post.image.url. Here we need to keep load static at the top because I am using static in other places in this HTML file as well. But the image should now be loaded correctly here. Now with that we added or we adjusted the templates, but still right now it wouldn't work. If we try to load our starting page, we don't see the image here. And actually here I just noticed I made a mistake because I deleted my max image here, which I didn't want to delete. So in the static folder, I should bring that back in the blog subfolder, images, because that's one image on the starting page which shouldn't be uploaded, but which indeed is a static image that should be hard-coded. So I'll just bring back max.png here, so that if I reload, this image is back. Because this is not one of our uploaded images, this really is a static file which should be part of our source code because it's not dynamically generated. But back to the uploaded images. They are currently not being served, as we can see down there. And this makes sense because you learned that out of the box, Django does not provide access to your entire file system here to the outside world. That's a security mechanism. So if we want to serve files from one of our folders here, we explicitly have to tell Django. And we do this in our root URL configuration, so in our project subfolder urls.py, by adding a plus after the URL patterns list, so by adding something to that, so to say, and then there we need to import something from Django conf to be precise. And there, from urls.static, we want to import the static function so that we can call this static function here. And then this function needs to know the URL, which it should serve to the outside world, and then what the concrete folder in our file system should be that should be served under that URL. And we want to get both values from our configuration. So from Django conf, I'll import settings, and then the first value here, which is that URL, should be settings.media URL. The second parameter which I want to pass here is the document root keyword argument, where I want to point at settings.media root. So that this defines the folder where the servable files live, and this defines the URL under which these files should be reachable. And now with that adjustment, our images should be back. If I reload here, you should be able to see your images now, also if you visit the individual blog posts here, and also on the all posts page. So this is working now. we do see our images here, and we now implemented file upload successfully. Now that we added the file upload functionality, we got two more functionalities or two more features left which I want to add. One is the feature to comment. Below a post, I want to have a comment form where any visitor can leave a comment, and then a list of existing comments. And in addition, on every post, I want to have a button which allows me as a visitor to mark this post for later so that I can read it later. And I then want to have a new item here in the navigation where I can view all those marked posts. Now we are going to add those functionalities, but before we do that, I actually first wanna change something in my blog app folder, and there in the views. Currently we have only function views there. All our views are functions. And since we also learned about class-based views, I think it makes sense to also convert those view functions to class-based views. Not because this here would be horrible or wrong, but just to again practice this alternative. Now, as before, feel free to try this on your own first. Think about which class-based view might be best for each function, so from which class you want to inherit. I will come up with my choices and my solution after a short pause, which I give you to pause this video. Were you successful? Let's implement this together. And let's start with the starting page. On this page, we have a couple of things which we're doing. We are fetching posts, so a list of data, even though it's a limited list to only 3 items, but still it's a list. And then we're rendering a template. So there are 3 main views which we could extend here. We could extend the default view class and then add our own get method to put this logic into such a method. We could do that, but it would only add extra code and not really save us anything. We could also use the template view to make rendering this template a bit easier. That could make sense because then at least we don't have to call render manually. Not a huge saving, and arguably in the end it would still be a couple of lines of extra code, but it would make more sense than the default view class. We could also use the list view instead, because in the end here we are fetching a list of posts. Ultimately, we will still not end up with less code because we'll have to override a couple of methods, but I will still go with that approach since it makes the most sense to me here and since I also want to practice that view again. So therefore, we first of all start by importing from Django .views.generic, and from there we import the list view in this case. Then I'll add a new class, the starting page view, which inherits from that list view here. Like this. Now inside of that list view, I want to define my template name. As a side note, Django also has some defaults which it expects, but I want to be very clear about which template is related to that view, so I will set my own template name and set this to blog/index.html. So the same template I'm using down there in this function version of that view. Then we want to set up the model for which data should be fetched. And here that's this post model which we're already importing. But then here we have to be careful because we both need to adjust the query set to only fetch a limited number of items as well as the ordering. And therefore, there actually are 2 methods which we need to override. The first method is the getQuerySet method, which basically controls how data will be queried. There I get a default query set, which fetches all posts, but I want to limit that. I want to set my actual data to this query set which wants to get all posts, so post objects all, to a limited number of posts, to only 3 posts to be precise. So the same slice which I take down there. And then it's this data, which I actually want to continue with in this list view. Now, I also want to make sure that data is ordered correctly, and we can do this by adding the ordering field here to our view. And we can set this to a list with all our ordering fields. So here I want to order by date in a descending order, but if I then also would want to order by another field after ordering by date in a descending order, I could add this as an extra entry here. Just as you can add multiple ordering fields to the order by method here. So that's how we make sure that our data will still be ordered correctly. And with that, we should be fine. With that, we can remove this starting page function and then go to urls.py in our blog project folder. And where we previously pointed at the starting page view, I will now point at the starting page view class and call as view on it. And now let's see whether that works. Make sure you save all files. And if I load the starting page, no data is showing up here. This makes sense though, because don't forget, by default, or at the moment I should say, we are expecting the data under the name posts here on our starting page. We are expecting the data here under a name posts because previously in the views, if I bring back the function form, we passed all our fetched posts with that key or under that key to the template. Now by default, object list is used by Django if you use that list view. So to change this, we have to change our context object name here and change this to posts. So that again, the fetched posts, which are ordered and limited, are provided to the template under that name posts, so that we don't need to change our template code. And with that change made to our list view here, if I now reload the starting page, our posts are back. Now, arguably, that's more code than we had before, and you can, of course, stick to the function view therefore if you prefer that. I just really also want to practice those class-based view agains, which is why I switched to this list view. Now let's also migrate this view for fetching all the posts. Here, again, I will add a class and name this all posts view and also extend the list view here because we still have a list of posts here. The only difference to the starting page view is in the end that we don't take a slice, but that we take all the posts. And therefore, this is an even easier class to write. Because here, I'll set my template name to blog/all-posts.html. So the same template we used here. I'll set the model, of course, to post because I still want to fetch all my posts. I'll set ordering here to the same field as I did above, so to -date, to order by date in descending order. And I'll set the context object name to all_posts because that's the name which we used before for exposing our data. We don't need to override getQuerySet here because here I don't really want to do anything else. I don't want to limit the number or anything like that. So therefore, that's the only thing we need to do here. And with that change applied, we can go to urls.py. And for this posts page here, we now want to point at views, all posts view as view, like this. And then save this. And if I now go to all posts, I have all my posts here. So this also works as it should now. Now, of course, we got more views, one more view to be precise, and that's the detail view. And we had a look at a specialized view for this situation as well. It's even named the detail view, and we can import it from Django views generic here. The detail view allows us what the name implies. It allows us to create a view which is focused on showing us the details. So therefore here, I will add a new class and name this single post view and extend the detail view here. And then again, we set up a template name, which in this case is blog/post-detail HTML. The model for which we want to fetch a single post is the post model. And then we need to make sure that we do fetch by slug, but that won't be a problem because this is supported out of the box by the detail view. If your dynamic segment here is a slug for a view which inherits from detail view, Django will automatically search for an item by that slug. So it is able to search by primary key, what we saw earlier in the course, and by slug, what we're doing here. So we don't need to change anything here. It will also automatically raise a 404 error, which in this case will show the 404 page we prepared, if an item should not be found. So with that, we can get rid of our post detail function here, and in URLs py now connect the single post view as a view like this. If we save this, however, and we visit a single post, we get an error. We get an error that the template post detail does not exist. Yeah, it should be post detail, not posts detail. So that's a typo from my side. Template should be post detail. But if I fix this and reload, it works. But we still have a problem here. Not a visible error, not an error message, but still a problem. And the problem is that the tags are not showing up here. Now, before, I did actually fetch those tags and show them, but I'm not doing this here anymore. We're just fetching the post, but our post model indeed does have this tags field. So what we can do now is in our single post view, we can override the get context data method here, where our data is being fetched. And here, of course, we get the automatically created context, which we still should return in the end. But I want to manipulate this context, and I want to add a new field. And that's a field which we expect in the template, this post tags field. We have to re-add it to make this template work again and to show those tags again. And post tags, of course, should be fetched based on our post which we're fetching. So for that, we can get access to this fetched post under self.object, as you learned in the previous sections. That's how you can get access to the detail data, which the detail view fetches automatically. So to the single identified post we need here. And then, since this will be an instance of the post model on this object, we can access all the post fields, in this case the tags field. So here we can access .tags.all to access all the tags for this given post and expose that through our context to the template. And then here I return the updated context, which contains this post tags field. And that should be post tags, not posts tags. But with that, if we now save all of that and reload, our tags are back, and this is working again. And now we migrated all those views to class-based views. If you want to do that or not is up to you. It's just an alternative, which I want to again practice here since it can come in handy and since there are developers preferring that over function views. Of course, if you have simple function views, as we had it before, you don't have to make this conversion. It's really also just about practicing this here, which is why I migrated all my views. Let's work on the form submission. And for this, inside of our form, we first of all need to add a very important tag. And that's the CSRF token tag, which ensures that we don't get an error when this form is submitted. It's a security mechanism which basically is there to ensure that only a form which is really on our side is able to talk to our server and make changes there. So that's an important addition to the form. Now I also want to add an action here to set the URL to which a request should be sent when the form is submitted. And I then also want to set the method. Now the method should be sent to post, but what should the action be? Now that can be any URL of your choice in the end, but I want to send it to this post detail page on which we already are, but now, and that's the difference, as a post request. So that in the post request, if validation should fail, we can render that same template again, but then with the form pre-populated with the user input and potential error messages. Hence, in post detail, the action here should lead to this URL, and to not hardcode the path on my own, I will use the URL tag here, and then it's the name of the URL which I need, so post detail page, like this, and then the dynamic segment value that should be inserted. And for this, of course, I already got access to my post here on the entire page, so it is just post.id. Slug, I mean, post.slug. So the slug of the post for which I already loaded this page. And with that, if we then submit the form later, a post request should be sent to /posts and then /whatever slug is relevant. At the moment, we don't have a view that handles this. It would reach this URL, since that's the URL we'll send the request to. But in the view for this URL, the single post view, I currently don't have a way of handling incoming post requests. We only handle GET requests, and for those we return the post detailed data. Hence here, I really want to add more custom logic, and I don't want to use the detail view to just return the details about a post. Hence, here I will actually import from Django.views, and I'll import view here. So this very generic view from which we can inherit. And I will get rid of that detail view import. Then I will inherit from view here instead of detail view, and therefore now restructure the logic here a little bit. For example, I'll add my own get and my own post methods here to handle incoming get and post requests. Now in both methods, we have to accept self and request. And now we'll first of all have to make the get method work again. Here, I now basically want to go back to what we had before. I want to fetch my post by using the post model and getting a post where the slug is equal to the slug I'm receiving here. And therefore, we can accept slug as a parameter and use that here then, because we know that this get method will be reached, or this view as a whole will be reached for this URL, which has this slug path here. So I go back to fetching the single post manually again, and then here in get, I return the render method into which I pass the request, where I then render block/post-detail HTML and pass in my context. And context now is a dictionary again, where I expose the post, like this, but where I also want to expose the post tags and the comment form. So we add post_tags and get that with post.tags.all and expose the comment form by instantiating comment form like this. And then we can get rid of get context data because we're not using a detail view anymore. And here we then pass context into the render method. So we basically went back to controlling this logic manually again, but we do so because we now don't just fetch a post, but we also have to handle a form, the creation of a form, and soon also the submission of a form. Hence we can now also get rid of template name and model here. But we did all of that because we now also want to add the post method. Here, in the end, I want to validate the submitted form and then either add that comment and do something or show that form again with the errors added to it. So therefore, what I'll do here is I'll create my comment form by instantiating comment form, but to that we can pass request.post because that contains the submitted data, as you learned. Then I want to check if comment form is valid. And if it is valid, I want to call comment form save. And we can call save on that form because it is based on a model form. Don't forget this. So that would then add this comment to the database. Thereafter, I want to redirect. So for this, I'll import from Django HTTP. I'll import HTTP response redirect. So that down here, we can call redirect and then redirect somewhere else. Now, the somewhere else part should be a URL, which I again want to create dynamically instead of creating it myself. And for that, we can import from Django URLs and import the reverse function, which allows us to construct those URLs automatically by just using the names of URLs. And here, I want to create a URL which points at this post detail page again. I want to redirect to this page on which I already am, but I want to redirect to it so that a GET request is sent to it again. Because I then want to get this post again and also all the comments of this post where this added comment should then be a part of. So here I want to redirect to the post detail page and provide my args, so the dynamic segments of this route, of this URL, which of course should be the slug of the page from which we're coming from. Because in the end, I just want to reload that page, but with a redirect. So how do I know what page we're on here? How do I know where to redirect to? Now keep in mind that we only reached this post method in this view because a post request, because of method post, was sent to the detail page where the slug is already part of the URL. So indeed, we should be getting the slug already here as an extra parameter, just as we get it in the get method, because the slug is part of the URL for which this view is reached. And you learned that this dynamic URL data, these extra parameters which we have in our URL, are passed as parameters to our view functions then. So we get the slug here already, and I just use that again for redirecting then. But when we redirect, it will be a GET request which is fired thereafter. Now that all happens if the form is valid. If we don't make it into this if block, so if the form is invalid, I instead want to render the template again. So I'll copy that render method. And here I then want to pass in my context, where in the end, I want to again provide the single post, of course, the tags, and my comment form, but now the comment form from up there, which contains the user entered data and any potential errors we might have detected. However, since we still also need the post and the post tags, we need to ensure that this data is fetched again, so I still want to fetch my post here as well, if we need to return the rendered template again. So we fetch the post again for the given slug, prepare our context, and render the template again if the form is invalid. If it is valid, we instead make it in here, save the post, and we're good. At least almost. Because one important step is missing here. When we save our comment form, we in the end create a new comment because this is a model form. Now the problem here is that we exclude the post field. We exclude it because that sets up the relation to a post, and that's not something the user should enter here. The user should just enter a comment, and the relation should be set automatically to the post on which page we left the comment. But that means that when the form is submitted, we as a developer need to make sure that the correct post is linked here. So we basically need to edit the submitted data and add a reference to the post before this is being saved. We can achieve this by adding an extra named argument here, the commit argument, and set this to false. When doing that, calling save will not hit the database, but instead create a new model instance. So in our case, a new comment. And then we can still edit this comment before we manually call save on it again to then save it to the database. So here we can edit comment to set the post field, which our comment model has, and set it to the post to which this comment should be related. Now we do fetch the post down there anyways, so let's simply move that code up here, and then we can set comment post equal to the post of the slug for which this entire view was reached in the end. And then once we did that, we manually call save. This will then allow us to take the user input, add extra data, and save that edited data back to the database. And then we redirect. And with that, we should have all the logic in place for fetching user input, validating it, saving it if valid, and showing errors if it's not valid. So let's give this a try. If I reload this single post page and I enter some data here, if I click Save Comment, this page is reloaded and I don't get an error. I also don't see the comment yet because we haven't added any logic for this, but it looks like it worked. I also have no error here. To verify whether it worked, I'll open up a new terminal tab and dive into the shell with Python manage py shell. And here from blog.models, I'll import the comment model to quickly check how many comments we have in the database. And that's looking good. We have one comment here. So if I now access this one comment and I print the username, that's Max. If I have a look at the text here, then this is awesome. And if I have a look at the post, it's related to a post object. And if I dive into the title of that post, it's mountain hiking. So this works, the comment was saved, and it was linked to the correct post. So therefore that is all working. Now let's try submitting an invalid page here. And for this, I'll open up the developer tools and select this name and remove the required attribute so that the browser doesn't stop me from submitting something invalid here, which proves that we need server-side validation because browser-side validation is really just there to improve the user experience. It's easy to circumvent, as you see. So with that, I'm submitting an invalid form, and I am therefore reloading this page, and I get my error here. This field is required. Now we can look into the styling here. We could highlight this invalid field in greater detail, but the main thing here is that it works, that we do see this error. So with that, let's now work on the way we present this error. So let's work on how we present errors. For example, if I again submit this in an invalid state here, if I remove required to demonstrate this again, if I click save, we jump to the top of this page, which is not ideal. It's not obvious that something went wrong. Hence, I want to show an error box up there, which in the end just informs us that saving the comment failed. Then down here at the comment form, I want to highlight the invalid input by giving it a red border and a slightly red background and changing the label color to red. And I want to change how the list of error messages is presented. I don't want to have bullet points here. Now for this, we're going to change some CSS code, and you'll also find the finished CSS code attached again. But we'll also need to change our template a little bit. But let's start with the CSS code, and there, for example, for this list of errors, we have the error list class added to this list. So we can use that to change how this list is shown. So if I change my error list here, I want to change the list style to none to remove the bullet points. I'll add a margin of 0.5 rem top and bottom, but 0 left and right. And I'll remove all padding, which I have. I also want to change the text color of the items in that list and change this to red, though I'll not use the red like this. Instead, let's maybe pick this red color here. And with that, this is how it now looks like. I also, as I said, want to change the look of my input field and of my label. For this, I need to make sure that they are aware of the fact that there is an error. And that's something where we have to dive into the template. As I did it earlier in the course, I conditionally want to add a CSS class to this div, which holds the invalid form field if that field is invalid. And for this, we can again add a if tag here to check if form field errors is true, which it will be if there are errors. And if that is the case, if we should have errors for that form field, I'll add the invalid CSS class to this div. And now we can utilize this invalid class to change the look, to change the styling. For example, to select any labels in invalid blocks and giving them a color of that same red color I'm using up there. I also want to select inputs or text areas in invalid divs, in invalid input blocks, and change the border color there to that red, and change the background color also to a red, but here I'll pick a very light red like this. So that now we do highlight it like this, and if I reload, it looks like that, therefore, making it obvious that something is wrong with this input. Now, as I said, I also want to have a box up there which tells me that something is wrong with the form as a whole. And we can achieve this with Django as well. We get our comment form here, and that is the created form, the form based on our model form. Now, conveniently, on the overall comment form, we also can check the errors key to check if the form overall, so if any of the inputs in the form has an error. And I want to do that here above my main block. There, I want to add another if tag and check if the overall comment form has errors. And if that is the case, if we do have errors here, I want to render a new div here, which is simply an alert box informing me about the errors. So here we could say, saving the comment failed. Please check the comment form below the post and fix your errors. That's something we could be saying here if our form has errors. So with that, if we reload with the errors which we have, we see that here. And actually, I want to have it above that header part. So I'll cut this and move it above this section, still in the content block though, but at the very top of the content block. And now if I reload, that's where my error box is. Now, it's not visible here because of how things are styled, and therefore we want to work on the styling, and I'll give this an ID of error box or alert or whatever you want to name it, and go to the post detail CSS file to style it. So here I'll select this alert by ID because I added an ID of alert to this div, and then give this a margin. And here I actually want to use the margin I used for my summary. There I have a margin set up like this to have appropriate spacing to the top, taking the header into account. And I'll use that margin and add this as a margin for my alert box. I'll also give my alert box a border of 1 pixel solid and this red color, and a background color of this light red here. I'll also add a padding of 1 rem. Let's save everything and see this. And this doesn't look too bad. However, it's way too big. So actually here, I'll give this a width of 90% and a max width of 40 rem, this alert box. And now we have this clearly visible alert if saving our comment failed. Now, to make editing and fixing the error even more convenient, we can utilize the fact that our comment form section has an ID of comment form, and we can therefore link to that. So we can add a link here in our alert box where we say fix, where we have a reference where we simply add a hash symbol at the end of the currently loaded page, and we then use this ID here. And that is a way of linking to fields or to elements with IDs on the page you're currently on. So if I do that and save this, we now got this fix link, and I can click on that to be taken to that comment form. Now I just want to style this a little bit differently. I want to have it look like a button. So therefore, back in the CSS file, I'll target the anchor tag in this alert and remove any text decoration. Give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and this red color. A background color of this red color, and a text color of white. Give it a padding of 0.5 rem, 1.5 rem, and a border radius of 6 pixels. And with that, it looks more like a button. Now, actually, let me remove the padding to top and bottom, reduce it a bit to 0.25 rem. And with that, if we now reload and have a look at the box, this looks better. Now, feel free to adjust the styling however you want. I'm, however, happy with that. Now, if we load this page without an error, so if I enter it manually again and load this page again, we don't see this, and we don't see the error style down there. That's really just something which we do see if we do submit something invalid. So if I again enter some data here, and I submit the name without a value, which I can do by removing the required attribute on that field, then we see this box, we see the error down there, and we can now, of course, fix that and then save the comment successfully. So that's how we can implement the comment feature, at least regarding the form that we need for that. Now, of course, let's make sure we also show those comments. We also, of course, want to show the comments that belong to a post. And we might want to show the comments above this comment form, below the post content. And therefore, we of course need to make sure that in the view where we fetch our post data, we also fetch the comments related to the post. That thankfully isn't too difficult though, because we did set up our comment model such that it points at a post and sets up a related name of comments, which means that on a given post, we can use the comments property to fetch all the comments related to that post. Therefore, in views py, when we set the context for the template, we can add a comments field here to the context and just use post.comments.all to fetch all the comments related to this post. And we do this here and also down here if we should represent this post again in case of a failed validation. And that should be all to get the comments into the template. Now in the template, we want to render them. So here below main, so below the main post content, I'll add a new section above the comment form. And I'll give this section an ID of comments. And here, the idea really is to show all the comments. So there I want to have an unordered list, and then I want to loop through all the comments. So here we can go through all the comments by using a for tag and going through the comments in comments. And then, of course, ending for here. And then we want to output list items here. And in each list item, we present a comment. So here we then could have a h2 tag where we output the username of the comment, so the name of the person who wrote the comment, with comment.user_name, because in our comment model, that's where we store that name. And then below that name, I also output the comment text. So here I have comment.text, and I will also add the line breaks filter to keep any line breaks that might have been entered. With that, if we save all our files and reload, we see our comments here. Now, before we work on the styling, there is something I want to work on first though. If I add a new comment from Maximilian, like this, does this work? It should. If I save this comment, I do see that comment, but it's the last comment here. Maybe we want to order it in the opposite direction so that the latest comment is shown at the top, basically. Now, for this, we could edit our model to also store the date when a comment was added, and that might in general be a good idea, but that's something you can do. I instead will simply utilize the ID, which is automatically added for every comment. This ID is incrementing automatically anyways, so a newer comment will have a higher ID. Therefore, in views py, where we fetch all comments, I will simply go to comments and call all, but then I'll call order by and order by ID, but in a descending order, so that higher IDs and therefore more recent comments are put to the top of this list of comments. And we also want to do this down there. By the way, I'm doing a lot of copy and pasting here. Of course, we could refactor this part into a common function if we wanted to, into a method of this view class, for example. But for the moment, I'll keep it like this, change the ordering, and if we now reload, you see Maximilian is now at the top here, so the more recent comment is at the top. And that's what I want here. Now, with that, let's again work on the styling here. And as always, it's of course generally up to you how you want to style this. I will just show you some example styles I come up with. And as always, you're also going to find the finished styles attached. To be precise, attached to the next lecture, because that is where we will dive into styling the comments. So let's style those comments. Now in the template, I added an ID of comments to the section that holds the comments. So we can use this ID for our styles. And therefore again in post detail CSS, I'll target my comments, so this overall section, and then give this overall section a certain look. Now it's totally up to you how comments should look like and how they should be presented. I will kind of repeat that look from my comment form section here. So I will grab this margin and width and max width and basically all of that. And hence we could also change that to a class which applies this common look. But to avoid this HTML change, I'll just copy those styles here into comments, so that with that, we also have such a card like this. And I will actually make it a little bit wider, I guess. I'll go for a max width of 60 rem instead of 40, so that this is a bit wider. And then I want to style the individual comments. For this, let me select the unordered list in the comments section and remove the list style by setting it to none, remove the margin and the padding, and then target the list items in the comments section. Here I want to have a margin to the bottom of 1 rem so that there is some spacing between the comments. I want to have a border to the bottom of 2 pixels solid and a slight gray color. I don't want to have that border for the last list item in that list. So there I'll set border bottom to none. And if we save this and reload, we have this look. Actually, I think more padding might make sense here, more padding to the left and right. So on the comments overall, I'll change the padding to left and right to 2 rem. So 1 rem, top and bottom, 2 rem, left and right, to have more spacing to the left and right. And then I'll change the content of each comment a little bit. I'll target my H2 tags in there and give them a gray color. Not that light gray though, but maybe a gray like this, so that the name is slightly grayish. And yeah, I think that's the style I'll go with. Now, as I said, we could add more functionality. We could, for example, save the date when a comment is created and show this as well. But here I'm happy with this way of presenting it. And now we successfully added this comments feature. At least almost. There is one last step missing, which I also want to add. So now we added comments. Users can add comments. We show the comments. But there's one feature I want to add. I also want to allow me as the owner of the page to administer those comments. At the moment in the administration area, comments are not manageable by me. Now, of course, since everyone can leave a comment, I definitely want to be able to edit or delete comments. And therefore, I want to make comments manageable through the admin area. Hence, we should go to admin py and then also register our comment model there. So import comment model and then add admin.site.register comment here to make sure that comments are manageable through the admin area. With that change made, if we reload, we can view all the comments, and now we can edit them here as well. And we can also delete them if there is some obvious problem. Now maybe we want to control how they are displayed here, and we can do that by adding our own class here, the comment admin class, where we extend admin.modelAdmin. And here I want to add the list display field to control which data about a comment is displayed here on this overview page, so that I don't see comment object, but I see more useful data. In detail, I'd like to see the user name and also the post to which this comment is related. And then we have to add comment admin as a second argument to the register method here. And with that, we now see it like this. Now we see post object like that though, which is not too helpful. So to also get more information here, I'll go to my post model and override the stir method here, which is also something we already did earlier in the course. Here we return how a post is presented if it is needed as a string. So if the post object is output as a string. And here I then wanna output, let's say, my title. And yeah, actually that's all. I wanna output the title. So let's output self.title as a string here. And with that added to the post model, we see something more useful here. So now we can also administer posts, and if someone is posting something that shouldn't be posted, we can delete it. So now with that, we added this comments feature, and of course you can fine tune it and edit it as you want or need it. But I would say this is looking good here. We now have the capability for users to comment and leave some notes. We can administer them. Let's now work on the last feature that should be added here, and that's this read later button, which should be added here in this block at the top of every post, which allows us to save a post for reading it later And then we should also add a new page where we can view all those saved posts. Let's work on this read later feature. And let's start by adding the button. In the post detail template, I'll add a new div below that div with all the tags. And there in that div, I'll add my button which says read later, like this. Now if we save this and reload, we got a button like that. I also, of course, want to work on the styling now. And for that, let's add an ID here to this div which contains this button. I'll name it read later. And select that ID for styling. It's up to you where you want to style it. I'll add it here. So select read later, and I'll start by giving this some margin. Margin top and bottom, let's say 2 rem, and 0 left and right. With that, there is more spacing. Now the button itself, of course, also should look differently. So I'll target the button inside of read later and give that a background color of transparent actually, but a border of 1 pixel solid and white, and some padding, 0.5 rem top and bottom, 2 rem left and right maybe. And for the font, I want to inherit the base font, which we're using on the entire page. So that this button looks like this. Now the text color should also be white, and there should be some styling when we hover over it. I also want to set the cursor to pointer. But then add the styles for hovering over it or for it being active. And here, I think it makes sense to set the background color to white and change the text color to a purple color, which we're using in our header. So in this main navigation, this dark purple color. I'll use this as a text color on the button if we hover over it. So if we now save this and reload, that's how this button looks like and works. And that's a nice style, I would say. Now the goal is that when we click this button, we kind of submit a request to our Django server with information about the post to which it belongs. And we then store that post in a list of posts which we save for reading later. But important, that list, of course, is different for every user who reads this post. And I don't want to store it in the database through a separate model, because there I'll have no good way of identifying the user to whom it belongs. That's why we can use sessions here. Sessions are managed automatically by Django. They are automatically user specific, so every visitor has his or her own session. And therefore, if we store data in a session, it's automatically mapped to a specific visitor. So sessions are perfect here. And therefore, when we click the button, a request should be sent to a view which adds this article to such a session. Hence, back in post detail, I'll wrap this button here, this read later button, in a form so that a request is being sent. And when we have a form, we therefore also need the CSRF token, as you learned. And then the action here should point at some URL, which we have yet to add, but it should definitely be a post request. And then I want to include a hidden input here, which contains information about the post which we want to read later. So here I want to set a value which is not set by the user, but pre-configured by us, the developer. And I'll give this input a name attribute as well. And here we could either store the slug or the ID. Both can be used for identifying a post, but I think it's easiest to just use the ID. So I'll give this field a name of post ID, and in the field I store a value of post.id. Post is a variable which is available and we can access the ID of that loaded post and pre-configure this as a value in this input. So now we need to add a view and a URL for this. Now let's work on the view and the URL. Let's maybe start with the URL. I'll add a brand new URL here in my app-specific URLs py file, and I'll just name it read-later, but of course it's up to you which path you want to use here. And we'll have to point at a view. Now that view is a view we have yet to add, and I'll add it at the bottom of my views py file. I'll add it as a class-based view, so as a class, but you don't have to do that. You can add it as a function, and I'll name it read-later view. Now the question is, which view do we inherit from? And in the end, what I want to do here is I want to handle an incoming post request, so I will inherit from the normal view and simply add my own post method, where we get self and request. And in here, I now want to manipulate the session of this user and add this post to a list of posts which are saved for reading them later. Now we'll work on that in a second. For the moment I'll pass, and I'll go back to URLs py and connect this path to that view, so to the read later view as view. And I'll also give this path a name of read-later so that we can construct a URL to that path. In post detail, we can now go to the form action, use the URL tag, and point at this read later URL, which I just added and named a couple of seconds ago. Now that is all wired up, and now let's work on the view to successfully add this post to the read later list. So how do we now add this post to a list of read later posts? Well, in the end, we'll need to manage a list of stored posts, and of course we want to get that list from the session. So we get our stored posts by accessing request.session, and then maybe stored posts like this, but that would fail if the user didn't store any posts before. So it's better to use the get method and access stored posts, because this will not fail, but just return none if there are no stored posts yet. So if stored posts is none, if there are no stored posts yet, I will simply set it to a new empty list. And then, either way, we want to add this post, which was selected by the user, to this stored posts list. Now, important here is that I don't want to add the post object as a whole. Instead, I just want to add the post ID, so that later on the to be added page where we show the read later posts, we are getting those IDs and we can fetch the full post objects there. Hence here, to stored posts, I now want to append the request post and there the post ID field. Keep in mind, in the template, in this form, which is the form submitting the request to this view we're working on, there will be this post ID field as part of the form. That's why we can safely access it here and store that post ID or add this post ID to our stored posts. I will actually store it as a number though, and therefore I'll call int to convert this ID which we're getting to a number. And then it's this number which is added to stored posts. But maybe this post was already stored in stored posts. That's something we should check first. So before appending our post, I want to add another if check, and I want to check if the ID we're about to add is already part of stored posts. So we'll actually grab this transformation of the submitted ID and perform this first. Post ID is the the result of calling int on request post ID. And then I check if post ID is in stored posts already. Of course, that won't be the case if it's an empty list, but if we got it from the session and it already contained data, then we very well might have that post ID in that list already. So if that is the case, if post ID is in stored posts already, then I of course don't want to append. However, we can check the opposite and check if it's not in stored posts, and then only append if that is true. So we only make it into this if check if the post ID is not part of the stored posts yet, in which case we append it. Otherwise, we don't do anything. Because otherwise we want to redirect somewhere else. And it's now up to you where you want to redirect here. I think it makes sense to redirect back to the starting page maybe, or to that read later page, which we're about to add. Now here, I will simply redirect with HTTP response redirect to the starting page, so to just /nothing. So this should hopefully add our ID to stored posts if it's not part of it yet. Though here, of course, we therefore also need to add post ID, so that this post ID is added to stored posts if it's not part of the list yet. With that, if we save all of this, if I reload here and click on read later, I'm redirected to the starting page, so I assume it worked. But let's now work on a separate page, on a new page which we add, where we show all these saved posts. So for showing these stored posts, I'll add a brand new template here. And I'll name it stored-posts.html. Now, just as with the other templates, I want to extend base HTML. So I'll add that in there. And of course, I want to set a title. So I'll copy that over there and say my stored posts. And I then also, of course, want to set up that content block with the main page content. Now, when it comes to the styling and the look of this page, that's of course totally up to you. I'll add a simple section here, and in this section, I want to output a list of all my stored posts with links which we can click to be taken to those posts. So I want to have an unordered list in there. And then in there, I want to have list items where I basically just have a link to that post like this. And then as a link text, it's the post title. And we would have multiple of such links here. So really just short titles that lead to the post. Of course, you could make this more complex. You could also output the image here if you want to, but I want to have a really short and concise list here. Now we need to make sure that this template is loaded though, and that we have a URL for reaching it. I would say that it makes sense to use this read later URL and therefore this view again. But now we add a get method to that view for getting that page and that list of posts. So here I add the get method to the read later view. And the goal now is here to dive into the session, get the stored posts, and send those stored posts to the template. However, not just the IDs, which is the data we're storing in the session, but instead the full post objects. Now, to achieve this, we first of all need to get our stored posts, just as we did here in the post method. Now, this might be none, but of course it might also be that list we're looking for. I then want to check if stored posts is none, so if we don't have any stored posts at all. If that's the case, or if the length of the stored posts is 0, so we have a list technically, but it has no items, if that's the case, I want to return without any posts, and I want to show some information on that read later page. So we could configure our context object here, our context dictionary for the to be rendered template, and then simply here add a key where I set posts equal to an empty list, And I also set an extra key in this dictionary, has posts, which I'll set to false. Else, if we do have stored posts, we want to fetch those posts from the database, and we then want to set those in our context. So therefore, we need to reach out to the database and fetch data from there. For this, we use the post model, which we're already importing. And we want to get objects, but not all objects. Instead, we want to filter them, and we only want to get objects for the IDs stored in stored posts. This can be done by using a special modifier when using this filter method. We're interested in the ID field, but only in IDs which are part of that list. For that, we can use the __in modifier and then set this equal to our stored posts list. And this makes sure that we only fetch the posts where the IDs of those posts are part of that stored posts list. So that's then my posts, and then I can set context posts here in this case to posts, and I'll set context has posts here to true. And then after this if else block, we return the render method into which we pass the request and where we render the block stored dash posts HTML template and pass in this context object or this context dictionary, which we populate here. And that should hopefully load us our stored posts. Now, to see whether that works, I have to add a new link to our navigation. So in our base template, where we have that navigation, I'll add a second link where I say stored posts. And here we want to construct a URL to this read later URL. So here it's URL read later. And when we now save all files, we have stored posts here. We might want to work on the styling. We can do that in a second. But we have stored posts here, and we are taken to this page with our dummy output. Now let's output some actual data here, because we are fetching those stored posts and we are passing them to the template here with these lines. So in the template, we now actually can loop through those posts. So add a for tag here and go through the post in posts to repeat list items as long as we have stored posts. Like this. And then here we want to output the actual post title, of course. So post title. And here we want to construct a URL to that post, which we can do with the URL tag. Then the name of the URL, which is this detail page. So post detail page, because that's the page that should be loaded if we click on a post. And then the value for the dynamic segment, which has to be the slug, and therefore should be post.slug here. With that, if we save this, I don't see anything here. So we're not loading any posts. And that's related to our view. In the post method, we are getting stored posts from the session, and we are updating that. But we are not saving that data back into the session thereafter. And that is something we have to do. Whenever we add an ID, a post ID to stored posts, after updating stored posts, we should reach out to request session and then add that stored posts key here and set this equal to stored posts. If that key didn't exist before, it's then created now, or if it did exist now, it's updated with our updated stored posts. So that's something we have to do here to store the posts we selected for reading. With that, it should work, but before we make it work, I'll go back to the template for listing all our stored posts. And there, I actually want to go to the section and add an if tag and check if we have posts with the has posts variable. which we also set here in our view has posts. And if we don't have posts, so if not has posts, then I want to output a text here where I say you didn't save any posts for later. And output this message in this case, so that we see this message here. Now it's overlapping with some other styles here, but we'll fix the styling in a second. For the moment, this is showing up here, and let's now show if we now are able to save posts for reading them later. So if I go to mountain hiking and click read later, and I then click on stored posts, that's here, and theoretically we could click on it if the styling would be fixed. So that's therefore what I'll work on next. Let's make sure that all the styling is looking good again, and that we are able to see those stored posts in a little bit of a nicer way, that we can click them, and that we have a navigation which we can see here as well. So time to finalize the styling, especially here on the read later page, but also on the other pages when it comes to the distance between our navigation links here. So let's start with that distance. For this, we need to go to the root static folder and there app CSS. Here we control how our main navigation items are styled. And here I want to add a margin to the left of 1 rem on all those links in the main navigation. And with that, if we reload, with the cache cleared, that is added. So that's looking better. Now on stored posts, we don't really see the navigation because it has no background. That's something we should change. I'll add a new CSS file, read-later CSS, and in here I want to set up the styling for the read later HTML file. Actually, it's called stored posts HTML, so that's the name I'll choose here as well. And you'll find this finished CSS file attached as always. Now in stored posts, we therefore now want to make sure we import this file by adding a block CSS files, as we have it in the other templates as well, which we of course also have to end here, where we simply add a link pointing at that file with the static tag, and then this file is stored in blog/stored post CSS. That's the path to that CSS file that should be included here. Now for that to work, we need to load static. Okay, so we got this. Now for the actual styling. I'll copy the main navigation styling from the post detail page, so from the post detail CSS file, and add this here as well in stored posts. And if we save this and reload, we now got this navigation. Now I also want to then target this section and give it some styling. So I'll give this section an ID of stored posts, and then target this section from inside the CSS files. There I'll give it a margin of 8 rem to the top, auto to left and right, 3 rem to the bottom, and auto to the left. This was to the right. Give it a padding of 2 rem maybe, and a border radius of 12 pixels. A slight box shadow, as I have it in many other places of this application as well, with the same values as I use there typically. And a background color of white. With those changes made, that's this box. Now it's way too big, so therefore let's give it a width of 90% and a max width of just 20 rem maybe, so that it's way smaller. Maybe a little bit bigger, maybe 30 rem. And then let's also target the actual list which is in there, the unordered list. Here I want to set the list style to none to remove the bullet points, but I do want to style the individual list items then. I want to give them a border of 1 pixel solid and a light gray color, a padding of 1 rem, and a margin to the bottom, or to top and bottom actually, of 1 rem for some spacing between the list items. And with that, that's how this would look like. Actually, margin should only be to top and bottom, so I'll set it to 0 left and right here. And on the unordered list, I want to set margin to 0 and padding to 0. Now the text here, the link, should look a bit differently. I'll target that as well and set this to display block and make it use the entire width it can get, and actually take the padding from the list item and add that to the anchor tag instead, so that the entire list item will be clickable thereafter, this entire box. And set the text decoration to none, and give it a little hover and active style. So a hover and stored posts, a active. Here I want to change the background color to this grayish color, like this. Now that's what we have here. Now I want to change the text color of this, and I want to assign this border actually not to the list item, but to the anchor tag. And change the text color to black here. Actually not black, but a dark gray. And with that, that's the look we got. We can still click this, and maybe let's also make it bold with font weight bold, like this. And we're done. Now again, you can always fine-tune this and make sure it looks exactly the way you want it to look, but I think this doesn't look too bad. Now we can store posts here as well, and of course not just one post, but as many posts as we want to. Now let's finish this up by making sure that posts which are stored for reading later, we don't show the read later button again, but instead we can remove them from our read later list. I want to make posts which we already did save for reading later removable. For this, we need the information whether a post is on the list, here on this post detail view, on this post detail page. And then, of course, we need to edit the session, and we need to get rid of the stored post there if it shouldn't be marked anymore. Now let's therefore go to our views, and here to the view which renders the single post, this single post view. Here, when we load this page, we want to include information about whether this post is saved in our session or not. For this, here in the get method, we can add a variable is saved for later, and that should be true if the ID of that post is part of our stored posts field in our session. So we get our stored posts from the session with request session get stored posts, and that could be none, but it could also be a list. And if we do have stored posts, so if this is not none, then I want to set is saved for later to true if the ID of that post is part of stored posts. So here I'll set this to equal if post ID is in stored posts. Else, if stored posts is none, I'll set is saved for later to false. Because if we have no stored posts, this post is definitely not part of such a list, as no list exists. And then here to our context for the template, we can add a saved for later key and store the value of the is saved for later variable in there. Now we need to do the same down there, and since we now really have a lot of code duplication with all of that, we might want to refactor at least that logic. I'll add a new method here to this single post view, which is not a built-in method which I override, but a brand new method I came up with. I'll name it isStoredPost. And besides self, I want to get access to the request here and to the post ID. And then we can grab this logic here, cut this and add it to this newly added method. I can access request session because I expect the request here. And I replace post.id with the post ID, which I expect as a parameter. And then here I simply return the result of is saved for later. And in get, I can then simply set saved for later equal to calling self.isStoredPost and passing in the request and the post ID. And we can now do the same down here. And we could refactor it even more, but that's a good start. And call the same method down there. And here we also pass in the request and that post. Now the saved for later variable is exposed to the post detail template. And therefore now here on this read later button, we can change the button text based on this saved for later variable. So here we don't always want to say read later. Instead, we can now check here with the if tag if saved for later is true. So if this newly added context key here holds a value of true. Or if that's not the case, in which case we want to say something else on the button. Now in the else case, that it's not saved for later yet, we will still say read later. But if it is saved for later already, we could say remove from read later list or anything like that. With this, if we save all of that and I reload this article, it says remove from read later list, since programming is great is already on my list. If I instead visit an article which is not on my list yet, it still says read later. Now we just need to make sure that we also do something else if the button is clicked. And the great thing here is that we can still send the same request, we just might want to change our logic in our view when a post request reaches that view. Here at the moment, we do something if the post ID is not part of stored posts, then we add it. Now we simply want to remove it if it is part of stored posts. So we want to add an else case here and ensure that we remove the ID from stored posts if it is part of it. And we can do this by using stored posts, and then there we can call the remove method to remove a value, in this case to remove the post ID. And then we still want to update the session either way after this if-else block, so that we override stored posts with our updated stored posts, where we either added the post ID or removed it. And with that, we should now be able to remove posts from our read later list as well. If we try this and I click on remove from read later list, indeed it seems like it was removed. The same for mountain hiking. If I then add something again, it does show up here again. So that still works as before. And now we got this read later list, which we can manage with the help of sessions.